Ferrari's telemetry spikes. The engineers freeze. Something in Hamilton's data doesn't fit the laws of physics. Vasseur walks into the garage. He asks one question: who changed the parameters? No one answers. On the big screen, Hamilton's onboard plays. Smooth, calculated, impossibly precise. The numbers weren't wrong. They were real. Vasseur looks up, half stunned, half smiling. It's not the car, he says. It's Lewis. The SF-25 was supposed to suffer here. The altitude strangles its downforce, its hybrid systems struggle with temperature, and its rear and already unpredictable becomes a live wire. Engineers had braced themselves for complaints, for the usual frustration that comes when physics refuses to cooperate. But the first thing they heard over the radio wasn't panic. It was silence. Hamilton didn't need words. His feedback came through the steering wheel, the pedals, the rhythm of his hands. Out on track, his car wasn't fighting the circuit, it was studying it. 3 laps in, something unusual began to happen. The data on Ferrari's screens didn't look like any run they'd seen before. Hamilton's throttle trace was unervingly clean, the energy deployment steady, the car's rear balance unexpectedly smooth. That can't be right, one engineer said, blinking at the monitor. The load transfer is too even. They reran the data. The numbers didn't change. In a car known for chaos, Hamilton had created order. His touch had rewritten the behavior of the SF-25 without a single setup change. Vasseur, standing behind the engineers, leaned forward with quiet intensity. He'd seen brilliance before drivers who could extract performance from nowhere, but this was different. This wasn't aggression or luck. This was precision. Pull up the hybrid flow, he said. When the screen refreshed, the entire control room froze. The energy recovery system, notoriously inconsistent all year, was operating at peak efficiency under Hamilton's control. Somehow, he'd synced his driving with the heartbeat of the machine. Every braking zone was a recharge, every corner exit a perfect release. It was as if he and the car were breathing in rhythm. For months, Ferrari's engineers had been haunted by the same question: why does the SF-25 behave like 2 different cars? On one lap it felt alive, balanced, responsive, untouchable. The next it was a stranger, twitchy, nervous, unpredictable. The numbers never told a clear story. In Maranello, they'd spent countless nights running simulations, chasing a ghost that lived somewhere between aerodynamics and physics. And now, in Mexico, that ghost had returned. The air in Mexico City is unlike anywhere else: dry, thin, almost hollow. It steals the power from engines and the stability from cars. Downforce that feels solid in Europe dissolves here. The track becomes a tightrope, and every millimeter of ride height can make or break a session. Ferrari's engineers feared this weekend more than most. The SF-25's weakness was already known. Its underfloor airflow was too fragile. At altitude, that flaw would be magnified. On paper, it was a nightmare waiting to happen. Hamilton, though, didn't look worried. As the team reviewed Leclerc's early laps, full of corrections and complaints about rear instability, Lewis sat quietly at the back of the garage, helmet in his lap, eyes on the data screens. He'd missed FP1, had no reference, and yet there was a calm about him, that same quiet focus that once terrified Mercedes rivals. When he finally rolled out for FP2, the expectation was simple. It would take him time to adapt, to catch up, to understand the car's limits. But Hamilton doesn't find limits. He listens to them. The first few laps were rough, a twitch here, a snap there. Ferrari's engineers exchanged glances, bracing for the usual radio message. It never came. Instead, Hamilton adjusted. Subtle shifts in steering angle, micromodulations of throttle pressure. He wasn't reacting to the car. He was teaching it, lap by lap, how to behave in the thin Mexican air. Through the first sector, where the SF-25 tended to lose grip, the data showed something strange. The downforce load curve was stabilizing by itself. The floor wasn't stalling anymore. The reason? Hamilton was managing airflow under car using nothing but timing and touch. Vasseur noticed it immediately. He's driving the aerodynamics, he said almost to himself. To anyone else, it was an abstract idea. But Vasseur understood. Hamilton wasn't trying to fix the car. He was synchronizing with it, using his inputs to regulate the aerodynamic pressure before it collapsed. It was a trick that no wind tunnel or simulator could replicate because it wasn't mechanical. It was human. He was delaying corner entries by fractions of a second, lifting just early enough to let the airflow recover, then rotating the car at the perfect moment to trap stability. By the midpoint of FP2, The difference between the two Ferraris was staggering. On identical setups, Hamilton's SF-25 showed 17% less drag loss and more consistent energy recovery through the MGUK. The engineers stared at the telemetry, almost offended by its perfection. One finally said, "It's impossible. The system can't behave like this." But it could, because the system wasn't leading the driver was leading the system. Then came Hamilton's first radio message. Calm, controlled, the voice of someone who already knew the answer. "The balance isn't wrong," he said. "It's late." For words that changed everything. The aerodynamic load was arriving milliseconds after the steering input. Not a mechanical flaw, a rhythm issue. Vasseur turned toward his team, half in disbelief. Months of data analysis, millions in simulations, and Hamilton had solved it after 8 laps. "He's found it," Vasseur whispered. "He's actually found it." When the checkered flag fell on FP2, the Ferrari garage didn't erupt in celebration. There were no cheers, no pats on the back, just quiet disbelief. The SF-25 had behaved like a different car under Hamilton's control, and no one could explain why. As mechanics began removing the tires and checking the sensors, the engineers gathered in the data room. The air inside was thick with tension and curiosity. Frederick Vasseur stood behind the monitors, arms folded, eyes fixed on the telemetry feed. "Run the overlays," he ordered. On the big screen, 2 colored lines appeared, red for Leclerc, yellow for Hamilton. What they saw next made the room go silent. Through every corner, Hamilton's throttle and brake traces were smoother, but not just smoother, synchronized. His throttle lift matched the exact microsecond of floor load drop, and his brake release coincided with the reattachment of airflow. "He's predicting it," said one engineer in disbelief. "He knows when the downforce comes back before the car does." Vasseur leaned in. "No driver can time it that precisely." Another engineer replied softly, "Apparently one can." The aerodynamic data was even more astonishing. Under Hamilton's control, the floor pressure map, normally chaotic in high altitude, had stabilized. The airflow beneath the car was consistent, with minimal oscillation. The same car that had terrified Leclerc with its unpredictability was now behaving like a precision instrument. The difference wasn't in parts or setup. It was entirely in Hamilton's hands and feet. When Hamilton entered the room, still wearing his race suit, the conversation stopped. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched the screens, studying the traces. Vasseur turned to him. "Lewis, tell me what you did." Hamilton's voice was calm, almost understated. "I stopped forcing it," he said. "The car doesn't want to be rushed into rotation. The aero takes longer to settle. Here, the altitude slows the pressure recovery. So I wait. Half a heartbeat longer on turn-in, and the airflow comes back. Once it does, I can carry the speed." The engineers looked at each other, processing the simplicity of the explanation. For months, they'd tried to fix the problem with geometry, suspension changes, and endless simulation tweaks. Hamilton had solved it with instinct. He wasn't just reacting to the instability, he was guiding the car through it. One of the aerodynamicists whispered, "He's effectively extending the floor's working range, manually." It sounded impossible, but the data proved it. Vasseur took off his headset, walked to the screen, and tapped a section of the graph. "So this," he said, pointing to the moment where Hamilton delayed his steering input by a fraction of a second, "is the difference between chaos and control." Hamilton smiled faintly. "It's not about control," he replied. "It's about letting the car breathe. If you give it what it needs, it gives you what you want." It was a statement that hung in the room like poetry. For the first time in months, the Ferrari engineers weren't arguing about fixes they were learning. What Hamilton had uncovered wasn't just a driving style, it was a truth about their own design philosophy. The SF-25 wasn't inherently broken. It was misunderstood. It didn't need to be dominated, it needed to be trusted. Vasseur, ever the pragmatist, understood what this meant for Ferrari's future. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we've been programming the car to think. He's teaching it to feel." The line drew a few nervous laughs, but everyone knew he was right. In an era obsessed with data and computation, Hamilton had reminded them that Formula One was still a human craft, one that rewarded sensitivity as much as speed. As the meeting ended, the engineers left the room in near silence, their faces lit by the glow of telemetry. Vasseur stayed behind with Hamilton. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" he asked. "You've just rewritten the feedback loop of the car." Hamilton shook his head slightly, smiling. "No, Fred. I've just learned how to listen to it.